Imagine challenging the most powerful ruler on the planet, armed with nothing but confidence and a wooden staff. No army, no influence, no backup plan. Welcome to ancient Egypt. And yes, this was never a fair fight. At the time, Egypt wasn't just a nation. It was the superpower. Massive cities, advanced engineering, unlimited resources, absolute control. If Egypt existed today, it would be the kind of company that owns the market, buys the competition, and still complains about regulation. Nobody questioned its authority, nobody pushed back, and nobody expected to win against it. At the top of this system sat the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh wasn't just a king, he was the system. Political leader, military commander, economic controller, and, according to official branding, basically a god. He didn't negotiate, he didn't explain himself, and he definitely didn't like hearing the word no. Picture the kind of boss who shuts down meetings the moment someone asks an uncomfortable question. That was Pharaoh, but with pyramids. Now running underneath all of this power was a massive labor force that kept the whole machine moving. The Israelites. They built the cities. They carried the stones. They did the work that made Egypt impressive, without getting credit, ownership, or rest. They were the invisible workforce, the kind of people everyone depends on, and nobody acknowledges. They built everything, history quietly admits, and owned absolutely none of it. For a while, Pharaoh tolerated this setup. Cheap labor was great for business, but then he noticed something that made him very uncomfortable. The population was growing, fast. More people meant less control meant risk, and risk was not something Pharaoh enjoyed. So naturally he panicked, not calmly, not strategically, full panic mode, the ancient version of refreshing analytics every 5 minutes and assuming the worst. Instead of asking reasonable questions, Pharaoh jumped straight to drastic solutions. Increased pressure, more control, harder rules, less freedom. Because when power feels threatened, it usually tightens its grip. And that's when the story introduces a very unexpected variable, Moses. At this point, Moses was not impressive, he wasn't powerful, he didn't have followers, and he definitely wasn't looking for trouble. In fact, he used to be part of the palace, and then wasn't. Former prince. Current nobody. No official authority, no political leverage, and absolutely no interest in public speaking, which somehow made him the central problem. Because while Pharaoh had armies, wealth, and absolute control, Moses had one dangerous thing, a purpose that wouldn't let him stay quiet. And somehow, against all logic, this ex-prince with no rank, no army, and a stick in his hand was about to become the biggest headache Egypt had ever faced. Moses was not an obvious hero. On paper, he looked like a terrible choice. He was a former prince, yes, but that part of his life was long gone. No palace, no title, no influence, no army, and absolutely no desire to speak in front of crowds. In short, Moses was an ex-royal with zero authority and negative confidence. Put in modern terms, he was basically a freelancer, trying to negotiate with a massive corporation that didn't even acknowledge freelancers existed. And yet, he was the one sent to deliver the message. Across from him stood Pharaoh. Pharaoh had unlimited power, unlimited ego, and exactly zero flexibility. He ruled Egypt like someone who had never been told no and had no intention of starting now. If stubbornness were a renewable energy source, Pharaoh could have powered a Wi-Fi router for days. He didn't compromise, he didn't reconsider, he didn't adapt. His leadership style was simple: control everything, question nothing, which made the matchup immediately ridiculous. Moses walks in with a stick and a request. Pharaoh sits on a throne and owns the entire system. That's when Aaron becomes very important. Aaron was Moses' brother and, more importantly, his translator. Not linguistically, but socially. Aaron was the guy who said out loud what Moses was thinking but didn't want to say. Whenever Moses hesitated, Aaron filled the silence. Whenever Moses doubted himself, Aaron kept talking. Think of him as the voiceover for Moses' internal monologue. And then there was the audience. Thousands of people watching this unfold in real time. The Israelites weren't fighting yet. They weren't free either. They were standing there, observing this confrontation like it was the most stressful reality show imaginable. Every conversation mattered, every reaction meant something, and no one knew how it would end. Now here was the actual problem, explained very simply. Moses had one job: convince someone who never changes his mind. That was it. His first request was clear and direct: let my people go. No threats, no negotiation tactics, no fine print, just one sentence. The response came immediately: no. Not a pause, not a discussion, not a counteroffer, just no. This wasn't a negotiation, it was an automatic response, like pressing a button and always getting the same answer back. Moses asked. Pharaoh refused, over and over. And that's when the real conflict became obvious. This wasn't about labor, it wasn't about economics. It wasn't even about politics, it was about pride. A ruler who could not bend, and a messenger who could not walk away. And from that moment on, the situation was guaranteed to get much worse. Moses kept insisting, Pharaoh kept refusing. And yes, things escalated very quickly. Every time Moses showed up, the request stayed the same: calm, direct, almost polite. And every time, Pharaoh's answer stayed exactly the same: no. But here's the problem. Every no came with consequences, big ones. Think of the plagues like notifications you can't turn off. You ignore one, and instead of stopping, they just get louder, more frequent, and increasingly impossible to pretend aren't happening. First, the water. One day, people went to the river, their main source of life, and it turned into blood. Imagine turning on your kitchen sink and getting tomato juice instead. Not refreshing, not subtle, definitely alarming. Pharaoh said no again. Then came the frogs, everywhere, inside houses, inside beds, inside places frogs absolutely should not be. Interior decoration was instantly replaced with chaos. Pharaoh said no again. Next up, insects and disease, gnats, flies, illness spreading. Egypt officially entered system-wide failure mode. Nothing worked properly. Everything itched. Morale dropped fast. Pharaoh said no again. Then came darkness. Not, it's cloudy today darkness. Total, heavy, can't see your own hand darkness. Like someone forgot to pay the electricity bill for the entire country. At this point, even Pharaoh started to crack. Fine, he said, go, leave, just make it stop. And for a brief moment it looked like the story was over. Then, almost immediately, Pharaoh changed his mind. Actually, come back. This became a pattern. Yes, then no, then yes, then wait, no again. Emotional stability was clearly not his strongest trait. Each time relief arrived, pride showed up right behind it. And pride always won. Moses would turn away and the consequences would return, stronger, louder, harder to ignore. The people watching all of this didn't know whether to feel hopeful or exhausted. One moment it looked like freedom was right there. The next moment everything reset. And every reset made things more awkward, more tense, more uncomfortable. Because now everyone knew what was happening. Pharaoh wasn't losing because he lacked power. He was losing because he refused to let go of it. And that's when the situation crossed into full embarrassment territory. Once again, Pharaoh said they could leave. Once again, he reversed the decision. But this time, he went one step further. He didn't just say no, he chased them. Against advice, against logic, against everything that had already gone wrong. Somehow, after all of that, Pharaoh still believed control could be recovered if he just pushed harder. Which meant the story wasn't calming down. It was about to collide with something much bigger. Eventually the chase ended, not because Pharaoh calmed down, not because reason suddenly appeared. It ended because geography got involved. In front of the people was the sea. Behind them was the most powerful army on earth. No side roads, no backup plan, no clever workaround, just water ahead and soldiers closing in. The collective thought was immediate and unanimous. This is it. It's over. Panic spread fast. People argued. People complained. People questioned every decision that led them there. Which, to be fair, is a very human reaction when you're trapped between a sea and an empire. Pharaoh, on the other hand, felt confident again. This was familiar territory. Control restored, no escape routes, problem solved. And then something happened that no one had on their mental checklist. The sea moved, not dramatically at first, not with thunder and speeches. It simply opened. At that moment, reality switched modes. Red Sea mode. Activated. Imagine finally finding free Wi-Fi in the middle of nowhere. Unexpected, suspicious, but you're not asking questions. The water pulled back, creating a clear path straight through the middle of what was supposed to be a solid obstacle. No debate followed. The people crossed, quickly, carefully, trying very hard not to think about how unnatural this all was. They moved forward while walls of water stayed exactly where they were, as if holding their breath. Once the last person made it across, Pharaoh had a choice, and naturally, he chose poorly. Instead of stopping, he doubled down. If they could cross, so could he. The army charged in after them, assuming that what worked once would obviously work again. Because when pride is involved, logic usually stays home. For a brief moment, it almost looked like a plan. Then, the water closed. No dramatic commentary, no second chances, just silence where an army used to be, and suddenly everything Pharaoh thought he controlled was gone. He tried to control people, he tried to control outcomes, he tried to control reality itself, and in the end he controlled nothing. Interestingly, Egyptian records from the time don't mention this incident. No loss, no disaster, no army wiped out. Which is funny in a very predictable way. Empires tend to document victories. Defeats usually disappear. On the other side of the sea, the people stopped running. They were free. Actually free. No chains, no guards, no orders shouted from behind. But freedom came with a small detail no one had fully processed yet. The desert. No cities, no infrastructure, no clear direction, just space, silence, and opinions. A lot of opinions. Because while leaving Egypt was dramatic, learning how to live without it was going to be something else entirely. And that realization quietly followed them into the sand. Moses started as a nobody facing an empire. No army, no political leverage, no impressive resume. Just a stick, a message, and the refusal to back down. And somehow, he won. Not because he was stronger, not because he was louder, and definitely not because the fight was fair. When you zoom out, the contrast is almost ridiculous. A wooden staff versus a throne. Purpose versus ego. Persistence versus pride. One side had power, wealth, and control. The other side just kept showing up. And that's the part that matters, because battles like this didn't end in ancient history. They happen all the time. Everyday people with very little face systems that feel untouchable. Companies, institutions, structures that don't like being questioned and really don't like changing their minds. And usually the odds look terrible. Power looks unbeatable. Authority looks permanent. And resistance looks pointless. But this story quietly suggests something else. Power doesn't always win. Persistence does, not instantly, not cleanly, and definitely not comfortably, but eventually. If Pharaoh were alive today, he'd probably still be losing arguments, just not with prophets. He'd be losing them online in comment sections, convinced he was right, surrounded by proof that he wasn't. Some things never change. What makes this story stick isn't the miracles alone. It's the pattern. Someone says no. Someone else refuses to accept that as the final answer. And the situation escalates until one side is forced to let go. Not because they wanted to, but because holding on stopped working. And that leads to a simple takeaway. Not every battle is fair. Some battles aren't even chosen. But some are necessary. Necessary to break cycles. Necessary to expose pride. Necessary to move forward, even when the path looks impossible. Moses didn't win because he overpowered Pharaoh. He won because he outlasted him, and that's a very different kind of victory. So now the question shifts. Which battle should be simplified next? David versus Goliath, the classic underdog story. Elijah versus the prophets, a showdown of confidence and pressure. Or Joshua versus Jericho, when strategy makes absolutely no sense until it works. Let us know which one you want to see next.